Hi, and welcome back to Programming with Pax. In today's video, we are going to talk about CSS Flexbox. So we'll start by looking at what it is and why you'd want to use it. And then after that, we're going to go over all of the different properties that are available for it. Finally, I'm going to share a sample project and explain my thought process on how I would build the layout using Flexbox. I did something similar in my CSS grid crash course video, and I know it was really helpful for a lot of you guys, and so I shall do it again now. And if you are interested in seeing that grid video, I will link it in the description down below and somewhere above right now as well. So with that out of the way, let's get started. All right, so what is Flexbox? Flexbox is the more commonly used name for the CSS Flexible Box Layout module. Everyone just calls it Flexbox. It also has extremely good browser support, with all modern browsers supporting it. And finally, Flexbox is used for one-dimensional layouts. Now you may be asking, what does one-dimensional layouts mean? With Flexbox, we are making layouts that are either horizontal or vertical, so rows and columns, where with grid, we can do two-dimensional layouts, so we can have a combination of both rows and columns all within the same grid container. All right, so a couple core concepts. First, there is the Flexbox container. So often this is just a div that wraps your items. If you give a container a display flex, then by default, the flex direction will be row, so horizontal. There's something called a main axis, which is an invisible line that goes the direction you have flex set to. So again, that's row or horizontal by default. There's also a cross axis, which goes perpendicular to the set flex direction. Now, if we switch the flex direction to column or vertical, then both the main axis and cross axis will change accordingly. So the main axis will now run vertically, and the cross axis will be horizontal. We're going to go over these more in depth with code, but for now, just know that there are these two invisible lines which are based on the flex direction that is set on the container. All right, finally, in this slide, I just wanted to show you quickly some of the power that Flexbox gives us for different layouts. I think it's valuable for you to see these layouts as simple graphics first before we dive into the code and make them ourselves. Baby steps. So here we have 6 different examples. So for all of them, they all have a flex direction of row. So here the purple is the container, and then the red are the items themselves. So in the first one, you can see that we have all of the items just lined up on the left side. However, we can also easily make them all go to the right side, or we could have them spread out. So the first item is on one end, the last item is pushed up against the other end, and then all the other items are spread in the middle. We can also do things like having one of the items grow to take up the remaining space. We can have other things where one item is on one side and then the rest of them are on the other. And finally, we can also just center all of the items right in the middle. All right, I have a sample project here. So in the head, we're of course importing the styles, the CSS, and in the body, we have a div with a class of container and 4 different items within it. And then we have a main axis and cross axis, which I just have commented out right now, but we're gonna add them soon enough. In the CSS, we have some basic styling for the page itself. In the container, we're taking up 100% view height, and then we're giving it this purple background. And the items, we just add some color and a little bit of spacing between them. And at the bottom, here is the styling that I have for the cross axis and main axis. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is add display flex. And this will add flex to our container. Now that we have this done, we can add in the cross axis and main axis just to kind of give you a bit better of an idea of what is going on. Now I said before, when we add display flex, automatically by default, the flex direction is going to be set to row. So if we save now, nothing happens. But there are other flex directions available. So we also have column. So if I save that, now we are stacking all of the elements on top of each other. But remember, the main axis follows the direction that we have set. So actually right now, we have the cross axis and the main axis switch. So this is accurate now. Now that we have column set, that means that the main axis is going to go vertically. We also have column reverse. So if I save that, you can see that it essentially mirrors itself, with 1 being at the bottom and then it counting upwards. And we also have row reverse, or if I save that, and of course flip the axis back because we're on a row again. And you can see that the row reverse essentially mirrors what we had in row. So you have 1 starting on the far end and then it counting inwards. The next property I'd like to go over is justify content. Now, justify content is used to position the items along the main axis. By default, it has flex start set. And so if I save, you can see that nothing happens. And that's why when you set flex, automatically it already looks like this, where the items are on the left side. We also have flex end, which puts all of the items at the end of the main axis. And again, notice the order of the items. So they are the same as if it was flex start. So it's not reversed like with flex direction if you have row reverse on. And we also have center here. So if I center it, now we are centering all of the items along the main axis. We have a couple more values to go over. So one is space between. So if we save that, now we can see the first and the last item are pushed up against the edges of the container, and the remaining items are spaced between. We also have space around. With space around, the items are evenly distributed along the main axis with equal space around each of the items. Note that visually the spaces aren't equal. However, the first item will have 1 unit of spacing to the left and then also to the right here. And similarly, the second item will also have 1 unit of space. So the spacing that is between items 1 and 2 is actually just the spacing of each of the items added together. There would be an invisible line going down the middle here, with the left half being from item 1 and the right half of it being from item 2. And then you add them together and that's what gives these big spaces here. Finally, we have space evenly. And if we save that, now we can see that the items are distributed so that the spacing between any of the items and the sides of the container are all exactly the same. All right, beautiful. So the next property we're going to go over is align items. So while justify content is always for the main axis, align items deals with the cross axis. It determines how the items as a whole are aligned with this cross axis. By default, it's set to stretch, which is why these items are stretched from the top to bottom. And if we save, nothing happens. We also have center. So it's going to center the items. It's going to make them as small as possible, as they need to be, along this cross axis. We also have flex start. And if I save that, the items will be pushed to the top of the cross axis because the top is the start of it. And then similarly, we can put things at the end of it, which is the bottom of the cross axis. All right, perfect. I'm going to put it back to center here just to make things a little bit easier for you to see. And the next thing we're going to talk about is flex wrap. I'm going to quickly add a couple more items here just to make this a bit easier to see and save. So now we have 8 items total. Now, if I open up the console and make the window just a bit smaller and smaller and smaller, you can see that all of the items will just continue to get squeezed until they're off the screen. They will not wrap onto the next line. So by default, flex wrap is set to no wrap. And if we save that, we can see the same behavior continues. However, if we set this to wrap and save, now we do the same thing. As soon as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and there's not enough space for all the items, they will be put to the next line. So we can see we're just squeezing everything out. Now, one property I don't see very often or use very often, but I want you to be aware of, is called flex flow. So with flex flow, you're essentially writing a shortcut for flex direction and flex wrap at the same time. So I'm actually going to comment out the wrap that's above. And now we can do something like column and wrap. And not flex flex, but flex flow. Cool. Now if I save, we can see that everything is in a row now. So this is the first column, and this will be the second column line. And if we put this into responsive mode so that I can shrink things. Cool. And let's shrink it here. Now you can see that things are wrapping. So there's three columns, and it will responsively wrap itself when needed. One last property I'd like to talk about is align content. So align content. Now, align content doesn't change the items in a row like align items does. Instead, it's used to set how multiple lines are spaced apart from each other. It changes the layout of the rows themselves, and it will try to align rows on the cross-axis with respect to each other and the flex container. So if there are multiple lines, that means we need flex wrap. And let's see what happens. So as is, let's open up the console again so we can change the size of the page. And we can see that all of the items are on multiple rows now. And so align content deals with the positioning of these lines in relation to themselves. So align content, and let's do, what is there available? Let's do flex start. So if we do that, now you can see both of the lines will shoot up to the top of the cross axis, because again, we're dealing with the align, which means cross. So both of these rows now will be pushed to the start or the top of the cross axis. We of course can do flex end and push it to the bottom. We can do center. And just like before, we can do things like space between. So if there was a third, it would be right in the middle, a third row, sorry. So let's see that in action right there. So space between, just like before, you're going to have the first and last items pushed against the top, and everything else will be spaced in between. So the align content, again, just deals with multiple lines, and so you need to have flex wrap turned on in order to get this to work. Personally, I mostly use justify content and align items, and that allows me to position whatever I need along the main and cross axis. All right, I have commented out the extra items, and now let's take a look at the different properties that are available for the flex items themselves. So far, we've really just been focusing on different properties that are available for the container, and now we're going to look at what we can do to the items themselves. The first property that we're going to look at is flex grow. Now, flex grow tells the flex item how much it can grow relative to the rest of the flex items in that container, based on the extra space that's available in the container. So it defaults to 0, but if I put 1 here and save, now we can see that this item 1, which we've selected from the CSS from here, now we're telling it to grow and take up any of the remaining space. We could also do the same for, let's say, flex item 3. And if I save that, now we can see that both item 1 and 3 are going to share the remaining space or the empty space, and they'll grow and take up that space accordingly. So if I put flex grow 2 here, now flex item 1 will have a ratio of 2 so that it grows at twice the rate as item 3. So if we make the browser a bit bigger, and then move the Elements tab, we can see that item 1 and 3 are growing at different rates. Similarly, there's also a flex shrink, and it allows you to set the shrink factor of a flex item. So if we want flex item 1 to grow pretty fast, but shrink even faster, we can give it a number of 4, let's say. So if we make the browser big again, and do the same kind of thing, you can see that item 1 shrinks quite a bit faster than item number 3 does. One more property that we can add to the flex items themselves is flex basis. So with flex basis, we can set the initial size of a flex item. Think of it as width or max width for Flexbox items. So let's set 200 pixels on the item itself, and item class is on all of these items. And let's comment out item 1 and 2 and 3 styling. And we can see that all of the items now are 200 pixels max. Now, if we make the browser much bigger, we can see that all of the items grow to a maximum of 200 pixels. So the items will hit that flex basis value, and then they'll stay there at that max. And if we shrink the browser, we bring it in, the items are still responsive and they'll shrink, but then as we grow it again, it hits that maximum flex basis value. Another important note is that if we have flex wrap set to wrap, then the items that have flex basis applied will no longer be responsive and shrink. Instead, they will wrap until it gets to a single column, and then they will shrink accordingly. Cool. So that is flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. Now, just like before, there is a shorthand we can use called flex. And instead of writing this, we can add flex. And we can set values here for this item 1. We can add how much we want it to grow by, how much we want it to shrink by, and also the flex basis. So let's say 200 pixels for this, and let's comment out the other one. And let's save. And we can see now that flex item 1 is growing at a rate of 1, and it shrinks at 0, and its width, its basis is set at 200 pixels. So if I shrink it and shrink and shrink it, there's going to be a point where it hits 200 pixels right there. So now you can see it's being pushed off screen. But if I inspect it, we can see here that there are 200 pixels right there. All right, I have commented everything out, and we're back to a simpler example. So one other thing that we can do is align self. So let's add that to item number 2, and we'll do align self. And here we have a bunch of different values available. So let's try flex start and save. And now you can see that item 2 shoots to the top of the cross axis. So when it comes to layout, you can often get away with just wiring up the parent container. However, if you need to reposition an individual item, then you can use align self. We can, of course, also do flex end and center. And I think that's about it. Yes, that's about it that you'd really want to use. All right, so the last property we're going to look at for flex items is order. So I'm going to change this item to be item number 1, and I'm going to give it an order of 1. I'm going to save it, and you can see now that the item is on the far right side. So unordered items will come first, and then ordered items. So if we do item 4, and we give it an order of 2, we save here. Now we can see 2 and 3 are unordered items, so they come first, and then 1 and 4 will be afterwards. Be careful when using order, as it will change the order for screen readers as well. So visually, it will look in one order. However, when tabbing through or accessing the website with a screen reader, it will read in another order. For this reason, I don't use order very often. However, there have been times I have used it for purely visual things. So when the item order really doesn't matter. So it isn't information that's being displayed, and it isn't something that will be interacted with by the user, such as form inputs or something. All right, so I said before that I wanted to show you a little dummy project similar to what I did in the grid video, just to be able to explain my thought process on how I would build this layout using Flexbox. So although it looks like a terrible website, at its core, there are a lot of similarities to a good-looking website, such as this Shopify theme. So we can see here at the top, in the nav bar, we have items that are sort of spread apart, and then we have a background image with some text and a call to action button. And then if we scroll down further, we have testimonials where there's something at the top, sometimes it's an avatar, and then the testimonial, followed by who it's by. So similarly, on this ugly website, we have a nav bar with things spread apart, some sort of background image that takes up the whole screen, some text, a call to action button, and if we scroll down, then we have a very simple layout for the testimonials. So to quickly go through the HTML, we have a nav element, which has both the logo and a div containing all of the links on the right side here. We then have a hero section, and a hero is just a word that's used for the first screen that you see on a website when it's a really big image that has some text and maybe a call to action button. And scrolling down, we also have the testimonials section. And within that, we have 3 different users for the 3 testimonials, with an avatar at the top, which is just this yellow circle, some text, followed by who it's by. Now I'm going to keep the complete CSS on the left here so you can see what I've done in real time. This is not perfect CSS. I would structure things differently, but I'm really just trying to show you in its simplest form what's going on with Flex. So to start off in the nav, we have 2 different items here. And so if we make the parent, the nav itself, into a display flex, then automatically it's going to be a row. And then all we have to do is add space between, which will push them apart. And if I wanted it to be a little bit more like this nav bar, where there's the logo on the left, something on the right, and then some things in the middle, then it's as simple as adding it here and saving. And you can see now that the first item is on one side, the last item is on the other side, and then we've got the remaining content that is just spaced in between. All right, next for the hero, what we're going to want to do is make it 100 VH or 100 viewport, so it takes up the whole screen. So we can make the entire parent wrapper into display flex. And note that this whole nav bar is position absolute, which is why it's over top of it. And then these items here, we're going to want stacked on top of each other. So what we're going to have to do is make it into a flex direction column. And then from there, in order to get things into the middle, we'll just simply have to do a justify center and an align items center. Finally, for the testimonials, for this, we're actually going to have 2 flex containers. So the first flex container will be here. So we add flex, and then to get all of the items to be spaced apart like this, we just have to add space around, and that will spread everything across. So that covers the testimonials, but then for the items themselves, we're going to have to do a little bit of work as well. So we can add flex on each of the user containers, and then we need to set the flex direction to column in order to get all of the items lined up vertically. And then we can just use justify content center and align items center, and that will put everything in the middle. And then finally, just add a little bit of margin to give some spacing here. All right, and finally, I wanted to leave you with a couple different resources for you to continue to learn Flexbox. So one is this code pen that I found, which allows you to quickly play around with flex direction, flex wrap, justify content, all of the different properties that we've gone over, and you can just quickly see how it all works. Next, I wanted to show you Flexbox Froggy, which is a classic. I remember taking this years ago when I was first learning CSS, and it was super helpful. So what it is a little mini game where you add the correct properties in order to get the frogs onto the lily pads. Trust me, it may sound a little silly, but if you do anything after this video, then I really would recommend you work through this Flexbox Froggy. It only takes maybe 15 minutes, and it will really help you understand all of the different properties, and you'll be able to use Flexbox much more confidently in your own projects. So do this. Finally, there is the complete guide to Flexbox on csstricks.com. So this is the reference that I use while working sometimes if I forget any of the properties that are available. So on the left side, we have all of the properties that are available for the parent, and on the right, it's all of the ones that are available for the children. If we scroll down, you can see all of the different properties that we've gone over in today's video, but just with simple infographics and a quick, clear definition. All right, so that is the fundamentals of Flexbox. If you found this video helpful, I would greatly appreciate it if you drop a like. Moving forward, starting next week, I'm going to release a bunch of JavaScript videos. So there are topics that I think a lot of web developers that are just starting their journey struggle with a bit more. Things like array methods, DOM manipulation, ES6, asynchronous JavaScript, these core, foundational topics of JavaScript. And I really want to bring out videos that I know that you guys will find helpful. So if you are interested in that, then hit the subscribe button and possibly even the bell button if you're really ambitious. And these videos will just start magically appearing in your YouTube feed starting next week. On that note, thank you very much for your time. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in the next one.